Let's be really clear about something up front. Today, we're not trying to solve the JonBenet Ramsey case. Nope, we're going to do something I think a little more interesting. We're going to take apart the defense narrative, piece by piece, and look at the architecture of it. We're going to analyze just how a story can be built to be so powerful, so strong, that it becomes almost impossible to break through with facts or evidence. So think about this for a second. This is really the central question for our entire analysis. How do you even begin to investigate a crime when the main defense isn't a verifiable alibi, I was at the movies, but an unshakable belief system? This is the absolute puzzle at the heart of the Ramsey case. And honestly, it pushes back against the very foundations of how forensic investigation is supposed to work. So our first big idea here is about how this was done. And it really comes down to faith. But we're not just talking about faith as a source of comfort. We're talking about faith as an impenetrable fortress, a strategy that literally changes the game from a police investigation into a kind of moral drama, putting the whole thing just out of reach of forensic evidence. Okay, so what you're looking at here is a fundamental clash. It's like trying to compare apples and the concept of God. On one side, you have forensic truth. It's based on evidence. You can test it, you can verify it, you can prove it wrong. But on the other side, you've got spiritual truth. That's all about personal faith, moral conviction. You can't prove it false. So the moment you put a spiritual oath on the same level as a forensic fact, the entire conversation just shifts. Suddenly, asking skeptical questions doesn't feel like critical thinking anymore. It starts to feel like you're committing sacrilege. And this way of thinking leads to this really fascinating psychological concept called belief superiority. You've definitely seen this in real life. You know that person who is absolutely convinced they're an amazing driver, even though they have a glove box full of speeding tickets? Right. The tickets are the external evidence, but their internal feeling, their certainty, is what they believe to be the real truth. That's belief superiority. It's this deep-seated conviction that your own internal feeling is just more valid than any fact from the outside world that disagrees with it. It's not that you're ignoring the evidence, you're just deciding it's irrelevant compared to your personal truth. And I mean, boom! You could not ask for a clearer example than this. This quote from Patsy Ramsey is the perfect encapsulation of belief superiority. She's basically saying that no amount of science, no DNA, no fibers, no data, none of it can ever compete with her internal knowledge of her own innocence. This isn't just a simple denial. It's a complete dismissal of evidence as a relevant category of truth. So you see the problem here from a criminological perspective, right? This whole approach creates a forensic dead end. And look, whether this was a conscious strategy or not, the result is exactly the same. How do you cross-examine an oath to God? How do you poke holes in someone's spiritual certainty? You can't. It just moves the whole conversation into this protected, sacred space where the normal tools of investigation are completely useless. Okay, so we've seen how this fortress of faith was built, basically elevating belief over facts. But that brings up a really important question. Was that faith applied consistently to everyone? In this next section, we're going to look at who was welcomed into that circle of belief, and maybe more importantly, who was kept out. Well, when you start looking closely, a really interesting pattern starts to emerge. For an investigator like Lou Smith, who was a big believer in the intruder theory, the doors to fellowship just swung wide open. They prayed together, they bonded over their shared faith. But for the investigators who were skeptical, the ones asking the tough questions, that fellowship was just gone, nowhere to be found. And that suggests that faith was being used maybe a little selectively, almost like a password to get into the club. There's actually a philosophical term for this. It's called instrumental religiosity. And it's basically when religious belief and language are used as a tool to achieve other, more worldly goals. Things like building trust, figuring out who your allies are, and building a wall to keep your opponents out. Faith essentially becomes the currency of trust, and you only give it to people who already accept your story. Psychologically, this makes a ton of sense. The behavior is known as splitting. It's a defense mechanism our brains use to handle anxiety by making a complex world really, really simple. You just divide everyone into two camps. You're either with us or you're against us. There's no gray area, no middle ground. Now, here's the tricky part. This can be a totally genuine response to trauma and intense fear, but it's also an incredibly effective strategy for a guilty person trying to gather allies and neutralize anyone who might be a threat. And from the outside, the behavior looks exactly the same in both cases. And that us versus them mindset leads us directly into our third big theme here. The powerful, persistent narrative that the Ramseys were victims, that they were targeted by hostile police right from the start. This wasn't just a casual claim. It became a central pillar of their entire defense, and it was incredibly useful. So once again, we have this clash of two different realities. On one side, you have the Ramseys' personal, subjective experience. For them, it genuinely felt like they were being persecuted. That was their truth. But on the other side, you've got the objective record of the investigation, which shows the police were, for the most part, just following standard procedure for a homicide where the parents are present. So, this raises a huge philosophical question. In the search for justice, which reality matters more? The one that was deeply felt or the one that was written down? And there's actually a psychological term that helps explain this gap. It's called hostile attribution bias. It's this tendency, especially when you're under unimaginable stress, to interpret totally neutral actions or questions as being hostile or threatening. Once you believe someone is out to get you, it's like you're wearing a special pair of glasses. Every little thing they do or say gets filtered through that lens and becomes more proof that they're biased against you. This doesn't mean the Ramseys were lying about feeling persecuted. It means they may have genuinely experienced it that way, even if it wasn't objectively happening. And here's the absolute crucial point from a forensic perspective. Regardless of whether that feeling of persecution was totally real or just perceived, just look at the strategic advantages it creates. It gives you a perfect reason not to cooperate. It discredits any damaging evidence before it even comes out. It makes the public feel sorry for you. And maybe most importantly, it reframes any potential obstruction of justice as just necessary self-protection. It's an incredibly effective playbook for controlling the narrative. Okay, let's pull all these threads together now. We've talked about a fortress of faith, this selective cooperation with allies, and this powerful persecution narrative. When you step back and look at all these patterns working together, they create this deep, unshakable ambiguity. And this really is the core conclusion of our whole analysis. The exact same set of behaviors that we can all see, the reliance on faith, the us versus them mentality, the claims of being persecuted, all of it is perfectly consistent with two completely opposite realities. Let's just lay them out side by side. In one reality, you have traumatized, innocent parents. They're using their faith as a genuine shield to protect them from a horrible injustice, and all their behavior is just a natural product of grief and stress. Okay, but in the other reality, you have a sophisticated, calculated defense. Here, faith is a strategic fortress designed to hide the truth. The persecution is a constructed story to obstruct the investigation, and every single action is part of a calculated defense. The evidence we have fits both of these stories perfectly. It's the ultimate analytical deadlock. Which leaves all of us with this one final, really haunting question. What are we actually looking at here? Is what we're seeing faith as the ultimate expression of truth in the face of an unthinkable tragedy? Or is it faith as the ultimate impenetrable hiding place? And the most chilling part of all this is that from the outside, the two can look exactly the same.